I pulled the travel bag from under the bed and began placing clothes inside, each soft rustle sounding louder than it should in the house I'd spent years trying to keep quiet. I had planned this moment for weeks, waiting for a night when Adrian's temper wasn't hovering on the edge of eruption. Tonight wasn't ideal. Nothing about my life with him ever was, but after he threw his dinner plate away simply because I used too much salt, I knew waiting for a peaceful moment was a fantasy. There were no peaceful moments. Only pauses between storms. The zipper was halfway up when I heard his footsteps behind me. Heavy, steady, deliberate. The kind of steps a man takes when he wants you to know he's coming. I straightened slowly, my gaze meeting his through the reflection in the bedroom mirror. "Where do you think you're going with that?" Adrian asked. His voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. That tone alone used to be enough to make me freeze. "I'm taking the kids to Helen's for a few days," I answered, keeping my expression calm. "For what?" "To think." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, the floor creaking under his weight. The overhead light caught the coldness in his eyes, so sharp it felt like it cut through my spine. "This is about divorce, isn't it?" His voice dropped even lower. "You think you can walk out of this house that easily?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew any answer would escalate the moment. He knew it too. His hand lifted slowly, not to strike, not yet, but raised just enough to make sure I remembered what he was capable of. My heart beat painfully against my ribs. I had seen that fist so many times, in arguments, in threats, in quiet moments of dominance that no one else ever saw. But just as he took a breath to speak again, his gaze shifted, toward the bathroom door, which I'd left slightly ajar. And then the doorbell rang. Once. Long, clear, controlled. Then again exactly the same. Adrian's entire expression froze. He lowered his fist but kept his glare on me as if warning me not to move. "Stay here," he hissed and walked out. The moment he disappeared, I followed him down the stairs, moving silently, keeping to the shadows of the hallway. From the top of the staircase I saw him adjust his posture, the fake smile, the straightened back, the smooth tone he reserved for visitors who believed he was a respectable man. He opened the door. And there stood Elias. He looked like a silhouette carved out of the rain, dark coat damp, hair plastered slightly to his forehead, but his eyes were clear and sharp as they locked directly onto mine. Recognition, worry, and a certainty that unsettled me. "Elise," he said. My breath caught. "Elias." Adrian stepped halfway into the doorway, blocking him. "It's late. What do you want?" "I'm here to see Elise," Elias answered simply. No excuse. No apology. Just truth. The temperature in the room shifted. Adrian's eyes flicked up the stairs toward me, then back to Elias, as if trying to piece together how the hell this man knew anything. Why he appeared here at this hour, looking like he already understood far more than Adrian wanted anyone to know. Elias scanned the entryway before speaking again, voice calm but unyielding. "Helen called me 2 weeks ago," he said. "She told me Elise showed up at her house for barely 10 minutes. Left as if someone was keeping track of her time. She said Elise wouldn't make eye contact." His eyes moved to my wrist. "She mentioned the bruise on her arm, too." Adrian stiffened as if someone had punched him. "And yesterday," Elias continued, "your neighbor Mrs. Thompson sent me a short audio recording. Just a few seconds, but enough to hear Elise crying, and something breaking." My breath left my chest. I didn't know Mrs. Thompson had reached out to anyone, much less to Elias. But of course she would. She'd known me since university years when I used to walk home with Elias after late-night laps. She had seen me change. Elias added quietly, "And last night when I called Elise," he paused. "You answered, Adrian. You told me she was busy. Then you hung up before I said a word." Adrian's face turned red. "You have no right. I have every right to make sure Elise is safe," Elias said, voice steady as stone. "Especially when everything I've seen suggests she isn't." The hallway went silent. Heavy. Tense. Upstairs, Lily started crying. Ben called Mom. Quietly. Emily tried to shush them. That was the moment something inside me finally split open. I walked down the stairs, slowly but with purpose. Adrian reached out and grabbed my arm, but Elias stepped forward instantly, placing himself between us with a calmness that felt like a shield. Don't touch her again, Elias said, voice low but terrifyingly controlled. The police already have Mrs. Thompson's report. You lay one more finger on her, and you'll answer for it tonight. Adrian jerked his hand back. He wasn't in control anymore and he knew it. I went upstairs, gathered the kids, and walked past the man who had controlled every corner of our home for years. Elias held the door open, saying nothing, simply watching to make sure Adrian didn't move. The night air outside was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but for the first time in a long time I wasn't trembling. Elias opened the car door. You're safe tonight, he said quietly. You don't have to go back in there. I nodded, and this time I meant it. The car sped away from the street that used to be my home, but I still felt Adrian's presence clinging to the back of my neck like a shadow that refused to let go. The Scottish night was cold and sharp, lights blurring against the wet windows as Elias drove with the quiet focus of someone who had survived countless night shifts and carried an instinctive awareness of danger. The children fell asleep almost instantly in the back seat, too quickly, too deeply, proof of how desperately their small bodies had longed for safety. I stared outside at the empty roads, feeling the remnants of fear pulsing through my bloodstream, fear that hadn't yet realized it no longer had a hold on me. Elias kept his eyes on the road, but every few minutes he glanced at me in the rearview mirror, not to interrogate or push me to talk, but simply to check if I was breathing steadily. When he finally asked, "Do you want to stop for air?" I shook my head. He understood the gesture wasn't refusal, it was survival. When we arrived at the women's shelter, the warm light spilling from the brick building felt almost unreal. Elias stepped out first, lifted sleeping Lily into his arms, while I carried Ben and held Emily's hand as she clung to me silently. Maggie, the night staff, opened the door before we could knock. She had the kind of calm presence that made the entire hallway feel safer just by standing there. "You're all right now," she said softly. "No one is coming through these doors without permission." Something in my chest cracked at that, maybe relief, maybe exhaustion. The room assigned to us was small but warm, stocked with fresh blankets and a basket filled with essentials. Emily picked up a soft toy from the basket and held it tightly as if it were the first thing she'd ever been allowed to love without fear of losing it. Once all three children were tucked in and breathing steadily, the silence of the hallway felt unfamiliar but comforting. I stepped outside and found Elias leaning against the wall near the window, holding a cup of coffee, his posture relaxed but his eyes scanning the corridor with quiet vigilance, as though ensuring nothing could reach us here. When I approached, he handed me a warm cup without needing to ask if I wanted one. We sat in the muted morning light filtering through the window, the world still half asleep. After a long moment, I asked him the question that had been circling in my mind since last night. "Why did you come right then?" Elias exhaled slowly. "Helen called me," he said. "She told me you showed up at her place for barely 10 minutes, and left like you were afraid someone was timing you. She mentioned the bruises." I swallowed hard as the memory flickered across my mind. He continued, "And your neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, she sent me a recording. Short. But I heard you crying." My throat tightened. I didn't know she'd done that, but I understood why she had. Elias looked down at his hands, then back at me. "Last night I called again," Adrian answered. "He said you didn't need me," and hung up. His voice dropped lower, steadier. "And I knew then it wasn't safe for you. I wasn't going to wait for something worse." I didn't speak because every word felt too heavy, but Elias didn't need me to explain anything. He stood beside me, offering presence rather than solutions, and for the first time in years, the silence surrounding me wasn't a threat. It was a space where I could breathe. I woke just before sunrise to the sound of my children breathing softly around me. The faint light pushing through the small window painted the room in a pale soft gold, and for a moment I didn't move. I simply watched them, Emily curled around Ben, and Lily tucked against my chest, sleeping in a way that told me their little bodies finally believed they were safe. It had been years since I'd seen them sleep without flinching at distant noises. Carefully, I slipped out from under the covers and stepped into the hallway, where the scent of coffee drifted from the staff office. Elias was sitting on a long bench near the window, holding a steaming cup, his hair still slightly mussed from a night of restless vigilance. He didn't look surprised to see me awake. He simply straightened up, quietly assessing whether I had slept or spent the night crying. "You slept?" he asked softly. I nodded. For the first time in a long time. Something eased in his expression, relief, maybe pride, maybe a subtle ache he tried to hide. He handed me a cup of coffee. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth travel into my bones. The team here will help you, he said. Lawyers, counselors. They'll take you through everything step by step. You won't be alone in this. The words didn't feel overwhelming the way they once would have. Somehow, knowing Adrian no longer sat downstairs listening for my footsteps made the idea of facing legal processes feel doable. A burden, yes, but no longer a trap. I sat beside Elias, watching the day begin through the narrow window. After a moment of quiet, I asked what had been weighing on me since the night before. Elias, when Helen called you, what exactly did she say? He hesitated only briefly, as though choosing how much honesty I could handle at this hour. She said you came to her house looking like someone was watching your back. She said you barely spoke. She said the bruise was deep. He paused. She sounded scared for you. That's why she reached out. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup. He continued. But what made me drive over last night wasn't Helen. It was Adrian answering your phone. His voice lowered. He sounded uncontrolled, like someone whose grip was slipping. I let his words settle in my chest. He wasn't trying to frighten me, just telling the truth. A truth I had ignored for too long. Maggie approached us with a clipboard and a warm smile, letting me know the legal team was ready whenever I was. Elias stood as I did, keeping a respectful distance but still close enough for me to feel anchored. For most of my life with Adrian, mornings were the worst, when I woke up knowing nothing would change. But this morning, for the first time, the fear wasn't waiting for me on the other side of the door. It had stayed behind in a house I would never return to, and as I glanced at Elias while following Maggie toward the office, I realized something quietly monumental. The worst part of leaving hadn't been the fear of Adrian's reaction. It had been believing I'd have to face the aftermath alone. And I wasn't alone anymore. By noon, while I was meeting with the shelter's lawyer, Maggie received a call. She excused herself, pressed the phone to her ear, and after a brief conversation, she turned to me with a calm expression that did nothing to minimize the importance of her words. Adrian reported the children as kidnapped, she said. Police are coming to speak with you. This is standard. Don't worry. We submitted your documentation hours ago. I didn't panic. Not like before. Not like the woman who used to shrink at the sound of Adrian's car door slamming outside. Instead, I felt something steady settle inside me, resolve, maybe clarity. The lawyer placed a binder in front of me. Photos of old bruises, Mrs. Thompson's noise complaint, the short audio recording, and Helen's written statement. Evidence, not excuses, not pleading, but facts that finally belonged to me instead of being twisted by Adrian's narrative. When the officers arrived, they were polite and professional. A female officer sat across from me and asked me to explain everything in my own words. I did. Calmly. Clearly. Without tears, because there was nothing left in me to cry about. When I described the raised fist and Adrian grabbing my arm, I saw Elias in the doorway shift slightly, hands tightening in his coat pockets, as if restraining the urge to intervene even now. When I finished, the officer nodded and said, "You and the children are staying here. He will not have access while this is under investigation." It was the most freeing sentence I had ever heard. Later that evening, Adrian showed up at the shelter gate shouting, demanding to see the children, demanding to see me. I wasn't allowed to witness it directly, but Maggie described it afterward, and I watched the security footage. Adrian pacing, yelling, trying to shove his way past the officers accompanying him. They warned him. He ignored them. When they threatened to arrest him for disturbing a protected shelter, he finally backed away with an expression twisted between rage and disbelief, like he couldn't understand how his power had evaporated so quickly. 3 days later, the court issued a temporary restraining order. When I held the paper in my hands, my knees almost buckled, not because I was weak, but because I had carried the weight of fear for so long that releasing it made me feel weightless. That night, as the kids colored quietly in our small room, Emily looked up and asked, "Mom, do we ever have to go back there?" I didn't hesitate. "Never again," I said. She smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded, and returned to her drawing. When the children were asleep, Elias found me in the small garden behind the shelter where strings of warm lights hung across the trees. The air was cool, calm. He stood across from me with his hands in his coat pockets, a posture that always made him look steady, grounded. "I'm glad you're safe," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you for showing up that night." He shook his head gently. "I didn't show up to be a hero or to replace anyone. I just didn't want you facing it alone. I would have never forgiven myself if something happened." His voice wasn't dramatic, just honest in a way that made my chest tighten. I told him I didn't know what the future would look like, that I wasn't ready for anything beyond breathing on my own again. Elias nodded with a soft smile, stepping close enough for his presence to steady me but not close enough to overwhelm. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "If all you want is space and safety, I'll stand on the other side of that line as long as you need. If someday you want more, I'll still be here. But I'm not asking." His words settled around us like the gentle glow from the lights above. I didn't promise anything. I didn't need to. "Tonight I feel peaceful," I told him quietly. "For the first time in years." And he answered, "That's enough." Later, as I watched my children sleep soft, steady, unafraid, I realized something profound. The moment I truly escaped wasn't when I walked out the door with my children. It was when I looked into the mirror of that shelter bathroom and saw a woman who no longer shook, no longer whispered, no longer belonged to the version of life Adrian had forced upon her. He could rage, deny, manipulate, but he would never have power over me again. I turned off the lights, tucked the blankets around my children, and closed my eyes with a small, quiet smile. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without fear.